Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. As you can see, I'm in a different location. I've got the law books behind me. Of course, we don't really use these things anymore. They're for show, but they make me look deep, right? Well, maybe not deep, but anyway. We are going to discuss the national news of the day, of course, and we're going to start by coming back to California a little bit, although he's been all over the country, talking about the Governor Newsom. We've already discussed on this show whether he is going to be the candidate for president at some point, possibly in 2028, and also kind of running as the just in case candidate should Biden, for some reason, have to step down within the next couple of months. Probably not likely to happen, but he has actually been all over the country. He's been in taking on Republican governors in public debates even before last week's debate with Ron DeSantis for a long time. And he is also one of the few politicians, Democratic or otherwise, who are willing to go out and speak well of Biden and tout Biden's successes. Of course, he comes from a pretty safe state that way, but he wants to definitely be seen as the team player for the Democrats. And of course, he is very brilliant. He comes across that way and presents as intelligent, youthful by compared to some other politicians, energetic. You can debate who won last week. It's one of those events where pretty much who won is who you want to see won. Of course, the governor was up against not only his opponent, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, but the moderator himself interjected into the debate in Mr. DeSantis's favor, to say the least. He called out Gavin Newsom on points, and he never even once did that with Gavin Newsom. But no matter what, with Ron DeSantis, but no matter what, Newsom kept his cool. He smiled. He presented. He's not expecting to win over a whole lot of the Fox News audience. He just wants to be able to come to the Democratic voters and say, "Hey, I'm willing to go into the lion's den and defend the Democratic president and Democratic Party values." And show that I'm not afraid to do that. So he basically is pushing the agenda. He's criticized other Democrats for not really pushing hard on certain agendas. Granted, he lives in California, and he represents California, which is one of the bluer states in the nation at the moment. So not much else to say. I'm going to pass this off to Dave. I mean, I have plenty more to say, but I think that as an intro, I think we've set it up. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as always, thank you for that intro. I'm in agreement fully with just about everything that you said there. So I'll start from the position of talking about that debate because it's sort of the data point most recent on the calendar. I think he did perform well. In part, like you said, because he went into the lion's den and he was really well prepared, and arguably he did a great job of being aggressive. There's some negatives maybe that he came across as being a little bit too slick by half. But that's, I think what could you do when being presented with data that might make your state look like it's not in a good light. So he was very well prepared. For example, on the issue of crime. So the crime rate, I think, comparatively in California is significantly higher than national average. Florida, where DeSantis is governor, is significantly lower than average. And so what do you make of that, right? He had a way of jumping in there and saying, well, that crime rate aggregates all violent crime. But if you just look at murder, which is the important one, Florida does terribly. And in fact, some of those cities in Florida are much worse. So, he was prepared, and, that's just one example, but he was prepared. And so I think he followed that formula kind of across the board.
You don't defend, you counterattack.
Exactly. Right. Thank you. And so when it came to like the COVID, the performance of the governors in response to the COVID virus, the challenges from lockdowns, he that I thought might have been one of his greatest moments there, where he high points where he basically said, look, Ron, you followed the science. Trump hit you for following the science, for your lockdown, for you wearing a mask, for you closing your schools. And DeSantis was saying, no, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. And it wasn't a lie. So that means that he pushed him off of his comfort zone, kind of
Sure.
made him uneasy. So those are just two examples.
I was disappointed in that. I just want to interject really quickly because if you took the Bay Area had one of the lowest death rates in the nation. He ought to have highlighted that. Southern California was a bit different, and the Valley was different because they just didn't hear to anything. But in the Bay Area, where they followed science, San Francisco in particular, the death rate was like one of the lowest, and he ought to have hit on that point to say, yet we had some problems with local leadership not following the guidelines, but the ones that the communities in California that followed the science kept the death rates down. It was frustrating to me that he didn't make that point.
I think generally speaking, across all the different topics that came up, he did that, block and parry, and he stood up, he stepped up, he stayed in the line of fire. It was the biggest negative by being a little bit too slick, I think, beyond rather than being a little too slick, was that they just talked over each other a bunch. There was this alpha moment where they were kind of shouting each other down, and that's just I think maybe that's par for the course. I didn't mean to get too lost in the weeds on that debate, but a big picture on the debate, there were nearly 5 million people that watched it live, and another nearly 1 million watched it later that evening. So he did get what he wanted. He did get national exposure. His performance is out there. I'm sure many millions more watched clips of it and saw it in other venues over the coming days and weeks. It's been less than a week. Time flies. Just over the coming days. But like you said, I think another key point about what you said is that he defended Biden's accomplishments really well, and arguably that was his number one job. One last thing I'll add here before I kind of throw back to you is that he did exhibit and continues to exhibit qualities that are really important in the media environment. And so he's got now name recognition. He's got obvious talent, deep wells of political talent, and then also even deeper pockets of donor support. So just on the merits, I do think he is a formidable national figure.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just cite one analysis of the debate. The Washington Examiner, which of course is a very conservative paper, wrote that Governor Newsom lost the debate because his own wife wouldn't allow for an extended debate. Apparently, they were talking about let's extend this further, and his wife said no, that's enough. Now you can interpret it that he's up against the ropes and she wants to throw in the towel without letting anybody know she's throwing in the towel. But probably the more reasonable analysis is he accomplished what he wanted to. Get in, get out, be done. And
exactly.
That was, so I think that was what it was. I mean, he's not going to. He's not going to convince a whole lot of people that watch Fox News regularly, but of course Fox probably had a bigger than usual audience with people who just were fascinated with that debate, and possibly people who are looking for an alternative to either Biden or Trump. I mean, that's a good place to go. DeSantis, of course, did that because he's desperate. He didn't agree to it early on, but he needs to not play it safe at this point if he's going to have a chance of even being in second place, as we'll discuss in the second session. But we could also go on to talk about what Gavin Newsom is doing. He's secured funding now for a high-speed railroad, which it didn't work out the first time going all the way south. They had problems annexing the land, but apparently that won't be such a big deal of this one going to Nevada. And the thought is that you could just get a single high-speed railroad into this country. It would be the open up for a possible, European, Asian style infrastructure. I have to admit that I'm not a little nervous about going in a train that travels 180 miles per hour, but apparently this is something that could save, the environment in a lot of ways. I don't know what they do about wildlife in that situation and keeping that on. I've just never studied up to it, and they'd be going right through the Sierras, obviously. So, I want to know more about that before I get excited about it. But he's pushing that as a leader. He's been pushing the electric car stuff. We've probably got more chargers in California than half the country, and he definitely is stepping up on that. He, of course, firmly backs Israel and everything, so he's taking all the cautious positions that way. But he's definitely presenting himself, and he does come across as young, vibrant, and I mean, what is he? He's almost 60 now. We didn't used to call that young, but now it's considered young. Anyway, it's definitely he is positioning himself to be seen as a Democratic leader. He'll obviously have a very prominent speaking position at the convention next summer if he isn't sort of the being drafted, reluctantly agree to be called presidential candidate.
I want to pick up on a word you actually used that maybe it sounded like a throwaway word, but leader. Today's politicians, so many of them are I wish it wasn't true, but are just abjectly contemptible. I mean, they just what I mean by that is they know very little, and they're doing the bidding of lobbyists, and they're just taking what's put in front of them on face value and voting party line, and they're just machine politicians. I'm not saying he's not a machine politician, but every time I've ever seen him speak, I mean, he's been very knowledgeable. He seems to steep himself in the details, and he can read the room. He's been able to, for example, when it comes to, different disputes in California with labor versus management. He knows that his eye on the prize is the presidency, not a popularity contest. Yeah. Now, I might personally wish he sided with labor in these debates, but in fact, he knows that he can keep the money flowing that he's going to need to become president. So that's, again, it's maybe sort of counterintuitive, but he's leading in a way where he's making choices, he's calling shots, he's leading by example, which I think makes sense. From his perspective, one other thing is that he's gone to China, he's gone to Israel, he's fleshing out his foreign policy bona fides. He's actually because that's sort of a glaring weakness in his national profile, but he knows that. So he's taking steps towards that. He as he will remind you over and over again, California, if it were a country, would be the 5th biggest economy in the world. So I say just, but it's, being the governor of California, it is like running a small country, but without the foreign policy elements. So there is a little bit of a gap there, that he needs to keep working on. So the question is, I think you framed this with me is he the standard bearer? And then, so I would push back, like the standard bearer now or the standard bearer later. I think he's definitely lining up to be the standard bearer later. He's letting it be known that despite the negatives, air quotes negatives, of being born wealthy, white male, he actually walks the walk. He does the work. So that's leadership as far as I see it. And then one last thing, and then I'll push it back to you. Right now, obviously, Vice President Kamala Harris, also from California, she's next in line, hard stop. If anything happens to Biden, she's next in line. But the question is, how does that play out in the political arena? And she was so, unfortunately for her, deeply unpopular when she ran for president that she didn't even make it to Iowa. She has never really recovered, and despite being the vice president, she hasn't gotten broad-based public support. So it makes sense that the party needs someone else to step in.
I will say, I wonder what could possibly make him vulnerable on that. And what I keep hearing right-wingers say is that, Kimberly, how do I even say her name? Guilfoyle? Does that sound right?
Close enough. Jill Foyle, I think.
She, was of course married to him at one point, and now she's involved with Donald Trump Jr. She's kind of embarrassed herself with, a meme, cringeworthy speech at the Republican convention. But the question is, well, does she have secrets that she'll use if he runs for president? Well, A, he doesn't seem to be afraid of that, and B, he had an affair on her. We know this. It's, it was out in the public. What else? I mean, you'd think that she would have used it by now if she intended to. He doesn't say anything about her. When reporters ask her, he says, "I'm not talking about her." Period. And the rest. But she made quite a journey as a star district attorney in San Francisco to where she is now. Is she a potential liability for him?
Well, we don't have a lot of time left, but I think just generally speaking, when you have an affair with the wife of your chief of staff, that's the liability. It's the values and the sort of what else don't we know about bad choices that you've made? But people are very forgiving. There's divorce. Half of all marriages end up in divorce. So people are usually willing to give someone a pass. And so I don't think that there's a trap door, but we'll find out when the time comes, I'm sure.
Well, I don't think that you have a straight up Muslim ban as much as you look at the countries that have terrorist activity that want to hurt Americans. You can ban those people from those countries. That's the way we should look at it, is which countries are a threat to us. You look at what came across the southern border. What worries me the most are those that came from Iran, from Yemen, from Lebanon, those areas where they say death to America. That's where you want to be careful. It's not about a religion. It's about a fact that certain countries are dangerous and are threats to us. A president has one job, and that's to keep Americans safe. And that's what we've got to do, is make sure that we have good national security in that process. And that's the way you should look at it, is where the terrorist threats are, how we're going to deal with it, and what we're doing about it. And the biggest threat we have right now is communist China. But you have to also look at what Iran and Russia are doing as well. And we need to be paying attention to that.
As we are speaking, there is another Republican candidate debate happening. I think it's down to 4 people at this point. Of course, Nikki Haley is one of them. We have discussed her in the past. She is probably the sharpest, certainly in terms of foreign policy, of the candidates. She has impressed people, and in some polls has surpassed DeSantis as the number 2 contender after Trump. The problem is she's still, tens, as much as 30 or 40 points below Trump, as the rest of them are. So, but the question is will she, if not this time around or possibly another time, be the first woman president? I think she is somebody who is able to come across as be the Schrodinger candidate, come across as a moderate to some people and a conservative to others. DeSantis hasn't mastered that, and it's a very difficult thing to pass. I personally don't think she can win the Republican nomination. Because as we've seen in the results in Georgia and Kentucky, I think that there is possibly a solid 5% or so of Republicans who will not vote for a non-white candidate, period. I think that's been a factor, and I think they've got a problem with that, and she's got a problem. But I could be wrong, and maybe she can overcome it even with that 5%. But the problem is if she gets into the general election, they just sit it out. There are a lot of them that do that. She also has gotten into trouble with evangelicals for saying that she for referring to her Hindu culture, and of course Hinduism is a religion, and many evangelicals see it as a pagan religion that may even be satanic, and so they haven't been impressed with her on that. On the other hand, I mean, she is probably, in terms of foreign policy, she impresses. She's stood up to the men around her. and done really well. In the last debate, she defended her daughter against Ramaswamy, who probably inappropriately brought up the fact that, while she's calling for a ban on is it TikTok?
Yes.
Yeah, TikTok, not Instagram. I think I mistakenly said Instagram last time. A ban on TikTok. Her own daughter uses it, and she says, keep my daughter's name out of your voice and your scum, the rest, and did it. She was seen as the tough mother defending her daughter. So she seems to be doing well, and maybe in another place and time. Before MAGA was so prominent in the Republican Party, she might have a chance. Maybe sometime earlier, but also maybe sometime later after MAGA, if it's finally been discredited. Who knows? But definitely she impresses. Oh, and before I hand it over to you, she received a big support from the Koch brothers. Well, only one of them died, but the Koch brother, and and actually a major Democratic Party donor is giving her some money. So, what will she one day be president, Dave?
I think so. So we have our colleague Aaron Donaldson not always, several times had mentioned to me that he thought that Liz Cheney would be the first female president. But I think that was before January 6th and
right.
and the schism within the Republican Party. So I'm not sure he's going to stand by that. I don't see that happening in the near term, certainly.
But she runs as a Democrat, but she's got problems.
She wouldn't do it.
She supported torture. I'm sorry. I respect her for that. But anyway, we're talking about Nikki Haley right now.
Exactly. Yeah. So I bring that up because when I did a little bit of research into people's willingness to vote for women for public office and women's willingness to run for public office, what I found is that, the vast majority, like 96% of people say that they would vote for a woman. It was like the highest category of any group they were questioned about. It's basically everybody. Almost anybody would vote for a woman for president. They just, about 25% of people though do say, well, but maybe my neighbor wouldn't. So there is some latent reservation inside people. They project it onto others, but in fact, it might just be some of their own uncertainty. But the bottom line is about 25, I think, of our current senators are female. So I think that issue is past, in my opinion.
In most states, and maybe in culture in general. But what about the red states that she would need to win?
So in her individual case, yeah, like she's a little bit of an interesting candidate. Two things. One, you mentioned her being Hindu. Her name is Nimrata Nikki Randhawa. That was her birth name. So that could be, if you have reactionary far right folks wanting to hammer her about her otherness, that would be, basically they made fun of Barack because of his name. So there's that same sort of, hate fueled ignorant approach that could be a problem. But her track record, everything that she's done, she's been earning her way into the minds of people to consider her for this role. I think that's why she's performing on stage. Her polls kind of doubled almost, and then up another almost 50%. She's kind of right now stuck at about 10 or so percent with 4 challengers left. So then the question is now or later. So now.
And maybe you could address that she's polling fairly well in Iowa and New Hampshire.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things about that. One is that, yes, like you said, she's in second place actually in New Hampshire, and just depending on the poll, I think that's the truth too for Iowa. She's right up in the mix, fighting for the lead in Iowa also, which that considering she was down at around 3% just a month or when these debates started 2 months ago, she's definitely earning the respect of people on the stage. But a couple things. Number one, she as governor of South Carolina after a massacre that happened, mass murder. She called for the removal of the Confederate flag from the state house. And that flag had been there since the 60s, since the civil rights movement. So she was saying that, look, this is, this as a symbol is keeping us from progressing. And she deeds met the moment. And she also served in the Trump administration as UN ambassador. So while Trump was out there saying great things about Putin, she was out there saying that, calling Putin out. So she was sort of representing America's best interest in light of the fact that Trump was president, doing some, arguably suspect bonding with Putin at the time. And also, she's on the record on January 6th, right afterwards, as saying that Trump will be judged harshly by history. So I think she's got good instincts, or her people, around her do. But more importantly, I think, is just that sort of charisma test. So you're talking about these early primary states and, in fact, the competition against Trump. Granted, Trump has a 40-ish% lead, like we said. Chances are he's going to win unless there's some, like we talked about, Deus ex machina, God out of the machine, some court case that does something, significant to push him out of the box. That's what we're looking at. But in terms of appeal, she's the only candidate on either side with net positive approval rating. Her positives are higher than her negatives. But I looked into that because I heard a couple people say it. And in fact, she actually benefits from the fact that she's still comparatively unknown. So there's about 30% of people that say, I don't know enough whether I like her or dislike her. Basically, everybody else has just a lot of dislike out there. So while she's the most popular, kid in the classroom, nobody really knows her name. Or at least the third. 1 in 3 people don't. One last thing on the polling, I think, is, if the Democratic Party is shooting itself in the foot to a certain extent, left and right. We could talk about that in a different show. But when you add in Kennedy, Cornel West, Jill Stein, that is about 1 in 8 voters are saying, I don't want either party. But if you take those third-party candidates out and you just compare Biden to all the Republican candidates, she does best. She beats Biden by 10 plus points, or not plus, but by 10 points in at least 2 of the most recent polls that I've been seeing. And where this is the key thing here, head to head, she's doing better. But it turns out that about, basically 15% of Democrats say they'd rather vote for her than Biden. So that's telling. That could be a lot of things. It could be like, hey, I'm ready for somebody like her that's a little bit more normal, a little bit more youthful, a little bit more like me, whatever it is people are saying. But I think that's a key insight that we have to see how that plays out over the coming months.
Yeah, I mean, a poll with between Nikki Haley and Biden is of limited value now, because what would happen if she did somehow win the nomination, if Trump drops out, that would be very dangerous for Biden. But Biden would be attacking her on points that the other Republicans aren't going to attack her on, which would probably take away a bunch of her Democratic support. That she would have. I mean, she's trying to sort of play the field with the abortion issue, but she has said that if she's presented with a bill, she would sign a federal ban on abortion. That's going to be a hard time right now, a hard sell right now, and the rest. And Trump is even trying to play himself as being a moderate on abortion, but the voters who are motivated by that don't want to hear that on either side. They want to know what you're going to do. They want you to take a definitive position. So that, and that's one of many issues. I mean, in fact, quite frankly, I think the polling this early is of limited value, especially when you look in half the polls, there are 20, sometimes even 30% undecided. If they allow for that. So it's you do also have the I'm going to answer this way because I want to show that I'm dissatisfied poller that when it gets closer to the election, they start thinking, all right, well, I'm stuck and I got to vote for this person.
Hey, I want to bounce them off if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah. So I don't know if folks remember, but Mike Pence, he got the backing of the Koch network and he became the vice president. And that, under that scenario, the nationwide network of lobbyists and their interconnected funders, they got what they wanted. They were able to, be in the room with Trump throughout. Now,
Yeah.
granted, that didn't turn out well, as we know. By the time we got to January 6th, the whole house of cards kind of fell apart a little bit. But they're getting the band back together, and it's possible that she could be his vice president. What do you think about that?
I think the part of the problem with that is I don't think he wants her as vice president. She's already said some things that he might have a hard time getting over with. I think if she could be, it would be an asset to him. I just don't know that his ego is going to allow for it. He has really said some negative things towards her about it, and that reflects a view. I think he really wants a sycophant to be in that position. And he thought he had that in Pence, who was, until the very last moment, until Pence got scared by people like Dan Quayle and others. So it's just so I think that there's going to be pushing for that. She would be the most effective one. Be fascinating to watch a debate between her and Harris. I mean, that would be really fun to watch. I just don't see that Trump will choose her. I think he's going to want to choose somebody more loyal. But I don't know. Maybe he could be pushed. Maybe the donors can have, make threaten to withdraw money, whatever. If she's not there, and maybe he'd be concerned about that. But he doesn't really depend on money anyway. He depends on all the free advertising he gets from the media, who basically, follow every word he says that he posts onto Truth Social. So I'm having a hard time seeing it because I don't think Trump likes her, and that's a big factor.
Well, thanks. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that.
What are yours?
Well, my take originally was I thought that he really likes to surround himself with, like you said, people who are gonna suck up to him, and like he says himself, loyalty is the most important thing, and running against him he considers disloyal. So it would be an outside, she'd have to run, what is it called, the outside straight or something. Like she'd really have to dot the I's and cross the T's. But he could wrap this thing up pretty early, which gives them a lot of time before the convention to angle and to kind of make amends. One person who I thought, granted, we're not talking about Trump's vice president at this point, but I did think he would be interested in Kristi Noem, South Dakota governor. But I think there was a scandal there we talked about before, kind of undermines her values proposition with evangelicals.
Yeah.
So there aren't a lot of people that easily come to mind here. But honestly, I think her success and her approvals, he likes that. He likes success. He likes popularity. He likes basking in it. But like you said, he wants to be the alpha here, and I think he could maintain that. So I think it's not an impossibility.
No, it's not. One thing is her surge is very similar to Newt Gingrich's surge at about this time in 2012. That didn't turn into anything. In fact, I didn't even remember that he'd run in 2012. So it's you got to have these things. Howard Dean seemed like he was surging really well at this time, and he got in and didn't do as well as he could have, as he was expected to in Iowa, and then did the whoop that pretty much ended his political career.
The Dean scream.
Yeah, the scream. So it's there's a lot that can happen, but we are down to I think it's 5 candidates at this point. Burgum dropped out yesterday or the day before. Christie just barely qualified. I think he qualified at the last minute today for this debate. I don't know who else would be there. If Trump falls, it's probably going to be Haley.
I want to go back to this one issue, though, because the media has been focused on this and attacking you. Under no circumstances. You are promising America tonight you would never abuse power as retribution against anybody.
Except for day one.
Except
Look,
for?
he's going crazy. Except for day one.
Meaning?
I want to close the border, and I want to drill.
That's
drill,
not. That's
drill.
That's not.
No, no.
That's not retribution.
I'm going to be. You know, he keeps. We love this guy. He says, "You're not going to be a dictator, are you?" I said, "No, no, no. Other than day one."
For the last segment, we're going to discuss Donald Trump and his day one dictatorship. He had an interview with Hannity. We're discussing Hannity a lot these days. And in it, he was asked to respond because Democrats and even a few Republicans are attacking him for being a potential autocrat. For being authoritarian in nature. In his last presidency, he put a lot of safeguards and checks and balances into test. He did it with January 6th, and so there are a lot of people basically saying that that he would be a threat, existential threat to democracy if he's elected. That also was echoed by the fact that, as you mentioned, Liz Cheney, her book is just being released, and she has a lot to say about the dangers of Donald Trump. So Hannity asked him about it, and he says, "What is it? I will not be a dictator except for day one," he said. And Hannity got flustered. He was like, "What do you mean by that?" And Trump was even making fun of him for it, and said, "Well, I'm going to close the border and drill, and referring most likely to oil, and basically saying that he's going to demand that this be done regardless of what the courts or anybody has to say. I guess day two he'll simmer down and not be an autocrat anymore. But he said this, and of course the Democrats jumped right on it. And his allies are basically doing gymnastics to try to defend what he said. He basically are framing it like they always do, that it's a joke, that he's playing a game to trigger liberals. That's what his support says, or anything like that. But, so is he a person that you take seriously anything he says then? I mean, they have to call that into question. The fact of the matter is he said it, and he didn't unsay it. It is it's a big question. And the question is Donald Trump, does this, did he reveal something? Or was it a big joke?
Well, I watched the clip a few times and saw different coverages of it. It seems to me that he's already shown his colors, right? He's already shown his stripes. He's going to do what he's going to do. And this is just his way of being provocative. But that said, the reason I'm kind of couching my words here and answering you is because he said he's going to use the court system to go after his opponents. He's going to use the Justice Department to go after his opponents. He thinks that's what's happening to him. So from his perspective, I think Hannity during the town hall, Hannity was saying, "Look, you're not going to do this retribution dictator thing, right? You're not going to undermine democracy, right?" And he's not going to say, "I told you I am going to. Of course I'm going to." So he's not going to say that, which is what I think is true. So he tried to find a funny way to tiptoe around it. He's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna," and then so it was a joke, but it was a joke at the expense of everyone else who believe in normalcy and the rule of law. I think sort of unilateral action on the border, that's we could expect that of him, that he's not going to play nice. As far as the energy piece goes, I think that's just a hat tip to the funders, hat tip to Koch Network and other fossil fuel industry folks. United States is already producing more oil than Saudi Arabia. Like, we are already the number one energy producing country in the world. So there's no reason to use executive authority unless you just want to, take a smackdown against progressives or the left or environmentalists, people who believe in, say, the Green New Deal, basically to swat your hand at people who believe in climate change. I think that's the type of person that he is. He has fun making jokes of that nature.
I agree. And this is, of course, what Donald Trump Jr. said. He said this response takes all of their hysteria out of the leftist dictator projection and throws it back in their face. This is the kind of fast-witted, on-your-feet ability that no one else in the Republican Party has. Then J.D. Vance says that Mr. Trump's superpower is that he is the most quick-witted leader in a generation. I mean, and then every grown man hyperventilating about this clip needs to find a sense of humor, he said. But then an interesting thing is that you have far-right activists and failed congressional candidate Laura Loomer says dictator Trump is nothing more than a meme, but I was thinking about it, and dictator Trump doesn't sound so bad. I honestly wouldn't mind. Sounds like a good way to make America great again. I mean, this is and then one day is all he needs. I mean, so even some of his supporters are kind of sort of taking it seriously, and they're expecting to do this. What is it? Another person said, one day is all he needs, and then the left will be totally wiped off the planet like scum to bleach. Another user. I mean, this is the language they're using. And I've been in forums where I've debated MAGA people, been called subhuman. When this one guy actually would repeatedly say Democrats are subhuman, which and I'd say, do you understand the history of that term?
Right.
And he was saying, I understand more history than you ever will, blah, 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 and it's just, anyway, it's, I do think it's an indication. I think he does intend to be as autocratic as he can possibly be, and I think he's just not afraid. This just is him saying he's not afraid of those charges. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, But Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who is a scholar of authoritarianism, kind of a modern-day Hannah Arendt, she wrote, strongmen Mussolini to the present has argued that the rhetoric gives his supporters permission to dehumanize and degrade his political opponents, which is, again, an aspect of authoritarianism that we've seen. And she says, autocrats always tell us who they are and what they're going to do with us. We just don't want to hear it until it's too late. Trump is telling us he's going to be a dictator, and when asked by Hannity, does not disagree. The fact that Hannity was a little bit shaken by this and said, "Well, so does this mean retribution?" And he just said, "Oh, you're getting nervous," and just repeated, "Well, no, it's just about the border and drill, drill, drill." But there's code in that talk, and apparently a lot of his supporters are like saying, "Yeah, go for it. We don't need democracy."
So that's where I was going to go with this is the crowd in the room. There was cheers. It was recorded. It was pre-recorded, but still there was cheering when he said it. But more seriously, there's been several or many experts on fascism that have come forward in the last couple of years, 2.5 years, to fill us in on the fascist playbook. And when a strongman leader has the support of the business community, and they're in alignment, that's a very powerful combination. But when you factor in that he's very likely to win the Senate and the House, and he's already got the Supreme Court, and he's I think he's a very, very likely to become the next president. So the question is that dictatorship? No, because he's going to get elected democratically, and he's going to have the support of the business community and the government when he purges the government of people that disagree with him. So I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see it as a dictator. I see it as just someone who is going to be a cult of personality at the highest levels of the most important seat in the most important country in the world, and he's going to get the votes that he needs from the people around him.
Well, possibly, although he may not take the House. I think he's got a good chance I keep saying he. I think the Republicans have a good chance of winning the Senate. I think that they are more likely than not to win the Senate, although the Democrats could possibly hold on to 50. But it's that seems far-fetched, maybe. And the House, I think the Republicans actually have a problem. They're going to lose seats, and they can't afford to lose them. They've got a problem that are being generated by the internal politics of the House. But let's say that he does. I mean, and he's got this. He doesn't like that he's been limited to it. He actually at one point thought he could fire Nancy Pelosi, right? Remove her as Speaker of the House. He's not sophisticated in his understanding of the law. But there's another aspect to this is because he challenged it on January 6th. He pushed it to the hilt. He wanted to stay in there, and big question is if he's elected in 2024, would he be willing to leave in 2028? I mean, and what would he do to stay in office? I mean, he's talking about if you talk about the agenda 2025
exactly.
He's talking about using police to shut down demonstrations in all the major cities. I mean, not police, military. But one more point for me to bring up with you to see what you say is that by doing this joke, you're in the audience, you cheer and clap because you do whatever for them, and by repeating and joking about it, you're normalizing the idea, getting people used to hearing it. This was said by Jennifer Mercutio, I'm saying it wrong, I'm sure, who is the History of American Political Rhetoric, wrote a book on it, and is saying that this joke is deliberately intending to normalize it so there won't be such a shock and maybe blunt the opposition, certainly within the Republican Party, should he do this.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't exactly hear the question, but the idea is that I agree with you that it definitely is that it's a normalization of behavior, getting people to laugh at the fact that he's going to use every means possible. In fact, his legal team has been making the case that if the president does it, it's legal. Now judges are finding against it, that it's not true. That I think right. The quote was something like the king's. I don't recall off the top of my head, but like the divine right of kings, it doesn't exist in the United States, that every person is accountable. Just because you're president doesn't mean you're not accountable. He now knows he's accountable. He's in the courtroom, but it's possible that he'll stack up hundreds of years of jail that'll be suspended sentence because he's president. So like I wish it, that we wouldn't have to deal with these complications, but I'm agreeing with you and that expert that you sometimes those undermined jokes are coming from a position of trying to normalize the fact that that's what you're thinking and that's what you're planning.
He's certainly not coming out and saying, no, I love the Constitution. I am a patriot of the system. And if the voters don't want me, then I shouldn't be the winner. He's not saying that, it's not. And it's not anyway, a bit nervous. Now, I do, if I was to be asked who do I think is most likely to be president, I would say Joe Biden. I do think that he's more likely than not to be president. But the polls, I don't. Again, I don't think that the polls are snapshots of thinking, and thinking far away from an election tends to be different than that. I tend to suspect that the election will probably be somewhere along the lines of 51 to 46% like that. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with Biden. And movements like this take off. I mean, he's in Agenda 25. He's basically got an enabling act in there. If you look closely at the enabling act of Germany, which was justified by the burning of the Reichstag and passed by a coalition of all of the conservative parties at the time, with only the socialists voting against because the Communist Party had already been outlawed. It's just, and there was no other opposition. Everybody just kind of caved to him. It is a very a scary thing. And it's considered hyperbole to raise this, but studying how, and I'm not going to say fascism. Fascism is very specific. Mussolini was fascist. That was a very specific ideology, and I think we throw it around too much. But I think authoritarianism and somebody who will find ways to break from it. I'm going to end by saying he would need the support of the military. What could he do about that? That was actually one of the reasons January 6th didn't work, was because military was not going to back him up. But I'll let you close out.
Yeah, I mean, we have about a minute left here, and what I would say is that I think he's a pretty smart guy when it comes to reading the room, and he's not crossing the military. He doesn't plan on crossing the military. He's got insiders anyway there to help guide him on his actions. But what I would say is that Project 2025 has the support of, approximately 80 of the top conservative think tanks in the country, and them and their colleagues and their peers and their networks have contributed chapters and parts of chapters. So it's not just the purging of the government. It's like the Patriot Act. So after September 11th, when the Patriot Act kicked in, for folks who haven't read it, the Patriot Act, what it does is it tweaks thousands and thousands of laws by changing a few sentences, some punctuation, some words. It was a prosecutor's wish list to revamp the entire federal prosecutorial system. I'm oversimplifying it because I only have seconds here.
It is true.
But the Project 2025 is similarly taking a policy here and a policy there, or 5 or 10 or 20 in each department in the government. Now, they do publish that every 4 years, but this one is at a particular time when they have a president who would probably push it through.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Okay. Well, this brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Well, Congress has reached an impasse when it comes to funding for Ukraine, Israel. Now they've added Taiwan and also enhanced border security. In past years, they probably would have linked all this together into a massive supplemental spending bill so that both sides could declare victory. But as we know, these aren't ordinary times. But I have recently read that there has been movement on core policy interests, and this when it comes to border security. It looks like if the GOP can secure concessions on asylum processing and detention reform, they're going to, which they will consider a significant accomplishment, that they would go for it. And the Biden White House has signaled that they're willing to make these concessions to get funding for Ukraine that they so desperately want. So my prediction is that with the president's support, the Senate will in fact be able to come to terms on a border security package, which will break the logjam, leading to the passage of funding for Ukraine and then eventually also Israel, Taiwan.
Well, for once, I'm pretty much going to echo yours. Just also to update everybody, the Ukraine funding bill got blocked today by Republicans in Senate using parliamentary maneuvers, and there's a big call for Biden and McConnell to involve themselves in the negotiations more directly. I am going to actually predict something, because this is going to be dire. This money needs to be happened. Otherwise, there's not going to be money for Ukraine this year. I don't know if Israel needs it, but is that you may see a joint press conference for the first time in a long time between Biden and McConnell to push something through. And yes, there will be some concessions on the borders, enough to allow the hard right to be able to say they won. Pretty much that's it. I don't know if it's going to make much of a difference in terms of it. Just gives them something to crow about. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.
you.